Please welcome Todd Cherches.
Robert, thank you so much. I'd give you a hug if we were there in person in Silver Bay, but still have to give you a virtual high five from the Big Apple. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to dive right into talking about the power of metaphor as it relates to leadership and dreams. So I like to make this as interactive and as experiential as possible. So I always talk about in my classes and workshops 3 V's: visibility, voice, and value. We heard some voice from Allison. We had some visuals from Helena. So in terms of value, I'd love for everyone to have your cameras on if you feel comfortable. And when we open up the conversation, turn your mics on. I'd love to hear your voices. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. And we'll use the chat box as well. So in fact, I need to get my chat box open and get everything up on the screen. And we're going to hit the ground running right now. So leadership dreams and the power of visual metaphor. So when you hear the word dreams, and Helena did a great job of kicking us off today and painting a picture of what dreams are all about. How do we turn dreams into realities, and how do we become not only dreamers, but leaders? What words, thoughts, or images come to mind when you hear the word dream? If you would, put it in the chat box. Let's see what you guys have to say. Any words, phrases? So inspiration, Rebecca, thank you for kicking us off. What else? Passion. Disney, thank you, Steve. Aspiration and inspiration, Howard, great. Weird movies during sleep, I love it. Keep it going, let's try to get one from everyone. Santa Claus. Hope, vision. What else? Creative initiative, freedom, desires. Great, I love it. Childhood, excitement, love in action, turning vision into reality, peace, belief, imagination. This is great, so keep them coming. So among the many words are these. Many of them up on the screen that I have are words that you've just put in the chat box. Of all of these, the one that we're going to focus on the most today as it relates to leadership is the word vision. That's central to my work, that's central to everything that I do. If you look up the word dream in dictionary, there's numerous different definitions. One is a series of thoughts, images, and or emotions that occur in a person's mind during sleep. That's what we think of most often. A cherished aspiration, ambition, or ideal, or to indulge in images as in a daydream, wishes, fantasies about something greatly desired. So when we're talking about dreams in the context of this workshop, we're talking about all of these things. As it relates to leadership, we want to think about how can we take our dreams, our visions of a future, think about a vision that is different from and better than the current reality, and then how do we collaboratively dream together and work together to make the dream a reality? As leaders, how can we make these dreams come true? So one of the ways of doing that is through the power of metaphor. And there were so many great, I was busily writing down so many of the examples. Michelle in the chat put in planting the seed of change. We're going to talk about planting the seed as a metaphor shortly. Helena talked about do I dare to dream, which remind me of from Hamlet, Shakespeare's to sleep, perchance to dream. Do I dare to change the universe? T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Do I dare to change the universe? Do I dare to eat a peach? In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. So all of these ideas and thoughts and song lyrics and lines from poems came to mind. Charlie put in the chat box about the quote from Hamlet, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. The quote that he remembered hearing from his father growing up. So interestingly, speaking of fathers, many people think I was a business major because I teach management and leadership, but I was actually an English literature major with a concentration in Shakespeare and poetry. And I remember my father saying to me, poetry, what are you gonna do? Just sit, how are you gonna make a living? Just sitting under a tree, rhyming, right? As you'll see in this presentation, I weave poetry into everything that I do, or at least I try to. And just as Allison led us in song and audio leadership, my focus is on visual leadership. But there's a lot of, if you picture a Venn diagram, the audio and the visual come together to motivate, to inspire, and to paint a picture of a better future. Robert did such an amazing job of introducing me that I'm not going to repeat it, but my company is called Big Blue Gumball, which is a metaphor. We focus on all of these areas, basically soft skills, management, leadership, training, and development. And the company name Big Blue Gumball, people have already asked me, very often ask me what it means. It is a metaphor. It's a metaphor that represents the world. The world, the earth, the globe is like a big blue gumball. However you want to take that, that's up to you. So, and our mission at Big Blue Gumball is to make the world a better place, one leader at a time. And to us, everyone is a leader. Anyone, everyone, at any level. All it takes is the initiative to step up and lead and to turn dreams into realities. At NYU, I teach leadership in the HR master's programs. Allison was just talking about the HR world. I very much spend a lot of time working in that world and trying to put the humanity back into human resources. I know laying off people, Allison, is not a pleasurable thing, but there's so much more that HR people can do to get a seat at the table, and not only to get a seat at the table, but to set the table and to host the table. And at Columbia, Allison, you'll enjoy this. I teach leadership in the MFA theater program. I teach leadership for Broadway stage managers at Columbia, and I've been doing that for 8 years and teaching at NYU for the past 11. I'm also a TEDx speaker, and my book Visual Leadership was published by Post Hill Press, Simon & Schuster, May of 2020. So a 2020 perfect metaphor for seeing things more clearly. Right. So if you look at the cover of the book, the rainbow eye, we're going to be talking about that later on, but just give some thought to what that rainbow eye might represent. In my book, part 3 is all about leading with visual metaphors. So you'll get some highlights of that section of my book today. And with that, let's get started. And speaking of visuals, I have to go back one second. I just figured out how to do this. So let's do this one more time. Let's turn the page and let's get started, diving head first. When I hear the words leadership, dream, and metaphor together, I have a certain image in my mind. What comes to your mind in the chat box? What's the first thing you think of when you see these 3 words in combination? What, or a hint, who? Correct, Rebecca, you said MLK, so great. So that's what I think of, and that's what so many of us think of. We think of his amazing, iconic I Have a Dream speech that he delivered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. way back in 1963. In most polls on the greatest speeches of all time, especially the greatest leadership speeches of all time, this is considered #1. Now, it's interesting, we've all seen clips of it. Maybe you've watched the whole thing from start to finish, but when was the last time you did? When was the last time you watched it, listened to it, read the script itself? When was the last time you really, really heard it? When was the last time you processed it, analyzed it, thought about it, reflected on it? We can do a mini version of that today. If this was a 3-hour workshop, we would show the whole video. When I send out the slides, we'll make the slides available to you afterwards. We're going to give you a slide that has all the links to the full version, a mini version of the beginning and ending, and as well as the transcript. It's amazing just to read the transcript of this amazing speech. I wrote a blog post a couple of years ago, actually more than a couple of years ago, that I repost every year on Martin Luther King Day about how he is the king of visual communication, because no one else has ever surpassed him in terms of his ability to paint a picture with words. And that's exactly what we're talking about, painting a picture of a better future. So when you get the slides, if you click on any of the slides themselves, it'll take you directly to the blog post and the videos. Now, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, it is filled with rhyme and rhythm. It is filled with alliteration and allusion, references to a variety of different things. For me, one of the things that's most powerful is his use of metaphor. So if you would, picture yourself watching the speech, reading the speech, listening to the speech, and these are some of the metaphors that he used. So I'm not gonna read them out loud. I'm just gonna put them up on the screen for about 30 seconds. Let them sink in. Look at the language, the visual language he uses. And again, you'll get the slides. I'm going to move a little faster. So this is the next set. Here's the next set. And as I read this was 1963, and so much has gotten better and changed since then, but thoughts of Juneteenth come to mind: inequality, racism, systemic racism, white supremacy, Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd, the quest for diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, all of these things come bubbling up to the surface for me as I read this speech from 50 years ago. The next set. I love that beautiful symphony of brotherhood, talking about a musical visual metaphor. That's a great one. And he talks about let freedom ring, right? Let freedom ring from all parts of the country. The circles in red are the areas of the country he mentioned at the end of his speech when he said, let freedom ring. The ones in blue are ones states he mentioned earlier in his speech. So he talks about let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, from the mighty mountains of New York, from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, etc. He meant by mentioning these states from East Coast to West, he's including the entire nation and in a way, the entire world in joining together to make the world a better place. If you look at the word dream, he uses the word dream 11 times in his speech. He talks about leading into it, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. And we'll talk more about that in a second. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, etc. To me, one of the most famous is the dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the content of their skin, but by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The use of alliteration really hammers this one home. But all of them, if you read them, the momentum, the energy, he builds to a crescendo just like a song would, just like a symphony orchestra would, if playing a concert. So his use of language was amazing. The parallel structure, I have a dream today, that goes on. At the end of this, he shifts from dream to hope and faith. And this reminded me of our Faith Hassel, but he was talking about faith in a different sense, right? He was talking about hope for the future. Some of the words that were mentioned in the chat box, right? This is our hope. This is the faith that I will go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to put you out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope, metaphor. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up together for freedom together. And Helena mentioned the word freedom a couple of times in her talk, knowing that we will be free one day. So the power, the energy, the imagery, the language is captivating. He talked about the American dream 3 times here in this last piece. And if you think about the American dream, again, the American dream, and this is not only the American dream, we have a global audience today, but the dream of a better future for children, for the world, for our planet, is a dream that we all have. It's not just an American dream, a universal dream of equality and equal opportunity for everyone, and love and brotherhood, etc., as Martin Luther King talked about. But what happens when the dream goes unfulfilled? Think about that. What's the impact when a dream is continuously postponed or delayed or denied? What happens to a dream deferred? In the chat box, who knows where this line is from? Little poetry trivia. Any other English literature majors? Going once, going twice. Langston Hughes, Allison, nicely done. Fellow English major or minor. Langston Hughes, in his poem Harlem, written in 1951, which was 12 years before Martin Luther King wrote his I Have a Dream speech, and yet Martin Luther King was referencing this poem within his speech without mentioning Langston Hughes by name, but it was so popular and so well known that Dr. King wove the themes of this poem into his I Have a Dream speech. So Harlem, the poem begins with the line, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? So think about that image. Where else have you seen or heard the phrase, the image, the line, a raisin in the sun? Allison, going for you. This is for Jeopardy. Allison would be, but Erica beat you to it. Raisin in the Sun was a book by, can anyone name the author? For 20 points, name the author of Raisin in the Sun. Lorraine Hansberry, Diana Brooks, nicely done. So Lorraine Hansberry wrote the book A Raisin in the Sun, taking this line from this poem, and wrote her classic 1959 book, which was turned into an amazing 1961 movie starring Sidney Poitier. If you haven't seen it, or even if you have, I just watched it again recently, go to Netflix or find it somewhere on TCM, Turner Classic Movies, I believe has it, and watch it. And look at what the world was like in 1961, how much has changed and gotten better, and yet how much still has not, and how much more we still have to go. So let's get back to the poem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Think about that imagery, right? A grape turning into a raisin. Or does it fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or does it crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, weighing us down. Or does it explode? So think about the impact of this poem. I'm going to give you another few seconds to reread it on your own. Take a minute, let the imagery and the metaphors and the question linger with you for just a few seconds. So I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to put you in breakout groups and give you a chance to talk about what you've taken away so far. So 30 seconds of rereading the poem Harlem. Okay, is everyone back? Okay, we're gonna, if you would, in the chat box, just jot down your thoughts. What do you take away? I had a great conversation with William. One of the things that came up is we all process, whether it's Martin Luther King's poem or a speech or the Langston Hughes poem.
How are you?
We process it through a different lens, right? Visual thinking based on our life experience, our age, our perspectives, right? We could all listen to or hear or see the same thing, and yet our perspectives may vary. So it's interesting. So if you want, in the chat box, just jot down some of your thoughts. And if anyone wants to, let's just take 3 minutes. Anyone want to speak? Turn on your microphone and just share your thoughts. What did you take from that conversation or any of the things we've talked about so far? Who wants to jump in?
This is London. I can speak.
Okay, Linda, go ahead.
Hey, so one of the things I really appreciate about Langston Hughes and Martin Luther King is that they're able to name adversity, but really hold up hope, right? I think through all his poems, the sense of hope that we're going to prevail, we're going to get through this. May not know how and don't know how long it takes, but we're going to get there. And I think this dual idea of kind of naming the reality, but also holding out hope is really powerful. It's not necessarily right, not only how.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. Yeah, there's a saying that leaders are dealers in hope, right? So you captured that very nicely. Lynette, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so with Anne, we were talking, she said, you know, metaphor in the business world gives us an opportunity to add a little richness to the conversation. The other sort of dimension is metaphor contrasts to analogy. And to me, metaphor is a lot more direct. It's like Todd is an angel, right?
Oh,
or Todd is like an angel. What's more powerful?
Mm-hmm.
What's more playful? So that was the other thought I had around metaphor and its contrast to analogy.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Allison wrote, you know, we need to fill up our cup, right? So we use metaphors and analogies so often that we don't even realize it, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. So what else? Anyone else? Let's get 1 or 2 more thoughts or reflections on the conversation you just had. Yes, Robert, thank you. The mummy is a metaphor for me. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. I hit a grand slam in Central Park the other day. So just so you know, I still, even though it's 2 years since I played before the pandemic, I still able to I don't know, discover the fountain of softball youth. So, but anyway, someone else, let's get 1 or 2 more thoughts, reflections on the conversation you just had.
We have a couple people with their hands up.
Sure, I can't see it. So anyone just turn your mic on and jump right in.
Todd, this is Sue. I was talking to Jeffrey and we were talking about the power of metaphors, and I love Jeffrey's inspiration that metaphors make anything into a 3D life force, which I think is beautiful. And we talked about Martin Luther King and the poem. And one of the beauties of the metaphors is that it makes it relevant to anyone. And it's also timeless, because you could read that the speech and the poems right now. And because of the metaphors, we can apply it to what we're experiencing in today's world and tomorrow's world and yesterday's world. And that just adds to the power. And the metaphors are what helps us do that.
Great, thank you. So yeah, both timely and timeless, right? The
Yes.
metaphor carries through. And again, going back to the visual thinking, it's the lens, we process it through our own personal lens and our own lived experiences. So there are certain universals, and then there's the personal as well, right? So it's the balance of both of those. Let's get one more thought, and then we're going to dive headfirst into what metaphors are all about and why they are so effective, whether in leadership or in life. Who else? Let's get one more thought, one more share from your conversation.
In coaching, it seems very predictable that if you ask your coachee to make a metaphor out of where they are right now in their life, it's so fast. And then it's so meaningful to them, and it doesn't take hardly a second for them to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Yeah, a lot of times I'll use visual props with my coaching clients where for example, I might say, so what are you curious about? What's one thing you're wondering about? Or how flexible are you? Are you willing to bend over backwards to serve your clients? So just using a little fun visual imagery, saying that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What other tools do you need to add to your toolkit, right? The light bulb, what ideas, what are you thinking right now? Give me one. So here's one of my favorites. If our minds are closed, there are very few possibilities, but if we expand our minds, it creates all this space for looking at things and thinking about things. But if our minds are closed to our dreams and our visions and innovation, this is what we're gonna get. So we need to open up and create that space. So those are just a couple of examples. Thank you, Sue, for prompting that. But those are ways we can use these techniques with our coaching clients to open up a conversation using visual imagery and metaphor as catalysts, as stimuli to trigger thoughts. And I did a whole presentation, and it's available online for the Harvard Institute of Coaching. I did a whole webinar last 2 weeks ago on visual coaching. And if anyone's interested, just contact me on LinkedIn. I could send you the link. So let's move full steam ahead on the power of metaphor. What makes metaphors so effective? In my work, I always talk about 4 ways to think and communicate more visually, and I break them down in my book and in my trainings to the use of visual imagery and drawing as one category. And Helena did an amazing job of using drawing in her presentation. I love that. I captured this image from her LinkedIn and just popped it in just before my presentation. But look at the power of this, because she could have just told us about it, but the visual spiral was so powerful, Helena, so nicely done. So using visual imagery and drawing, using mental models and frameworks, metaphor and analogy, and storytelling and humor, if and when appropriate, those are my 4 kind of buckets that are not, they don't exist in silos, but when used in combination are incredibly powerful. Our focus today is on metaphor and analogy, but you'll see examples of these throughout not only my session, but everyone's session. So Aristotle said, this is a very famous quote by Aristotle, that the greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. It is the one thing that cannot be learned from others. And it is also a sign of genius, since a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in the dissimilar. And I love this quote because it's, there's also a quote by another Greek philosopher who says that a wonderful harmony arises when we join together the seemingly unconnected. When we connect an abstract idea to a concrete idea, it allows us to see it and experience it and think about it in fresh new ways. So what is a metaphor? There's a lot of different definitions, and you can just look it up in the dictionary or Wikipedia or whatever. But one simple definition is it's a figure of speech that for rhetorical effect compares one thing to another, right? So in the poem Harlem, he compares a deferred dream to a dried up raisin, to a running sore, to the smell of rotten meat, to something crusting and sugaring over like a syrupy sweet, a heavy load, a burden that's weighing us down, that's basically keeping us from moving forward, like pushing a rock up a hill. Or does it explode? in rage, anger, violence, frustration. So all of these things could happen. And if you notice, he doesn't say this is what happens to a dream deferred. He asks the question, what happens to a dream deferred? Because it could be any of these things based on different people, different situations. So if you look at metaphor, you'll see that there are two aspects to a metaphor, two parts. The tenor, the subject to which the attributes are ascribed, and then the vehicle. And if you think about a vehicle, it's something that transports us from one place to another. It's the object to which the subject is being compared. So a lot of times we use the word metaphor, but we haven't really looked up the definition or taken a deep dive into what they are and how they work. So all of the vehicles in Martin Luther King's speech are here in bold, and you could again take a look at these slides in more detail when you get the copy. So, but why metaphors? What do metaphors do that literal language does not? Metaphors allow us to make the abstract ideas concrete. They make intangible things tangible. They help to simplify complexity. They make the unfamiliar familiar, and they help make the invisible visible. And that, to me, of all of these, it's all of them matter, but to me, the invisible to visible relates most closely to my visual thinking approach to everything I do. How can we use visual imagery and visual language to communicate ideas more effectively? How can we paint a picture with words? And as leaders, how can we paint a picture of a better future, as Martin Luther King did in his I Have a Dream speech? John Quincy Adams, one of the famous quotes on leadership, is if your actions inspire others to dream more, to learn more, to do more, and become more, you are a leader. So again, it's not about title or position. It's about leadership at every level. So how can we as leaders and dreamers use the power of metaphor? Let's talk about a few real world examples and go through these really quick. So when I do workshops on leadership and I say, what word comes to mind when you think about leadership? Vision tends to be number one. So think about, what does it mean to have a leadership vision? What does it mean to say that someone is a visionary leader? It's about seeing the future. It's about seeing possibilities, right? That's what my whole visual leadership approach is about. How do you get people to see what you're saying? How do you get your ideas out of your head and into someone else's and out there into the world to make those visions a reality? So visual leadership is the application of visual thinking to the practice of leadership. And what is visual thinking? In a nutshell, which is a metaphor, visual thinking is about thinking in pictures. And visual communication is about communicating with pictures. And it could be either visual imagery or visual language, or both in combination. And again, the goal is to get people to see what we're saying. And that's why the saying, a picture is 1,000 words, we all know it. And we all know that that's a very powerful and true statement. I mentioned my visual coaching session I did a few weeks ago for Harvard. The word coaching itself is a metaphor. And I'm big, as an English literature major, I love word origins. I'm always living on etymology.com. The word coach, the English word coach, comes from this French word, which comes from this German word, which comes from this Hungarian word, which comes from the city in Hungary called Koch, Hungary, where the carriage was invented in the 1400s. First horse-drawn carriages. So it was called the cart of coach. And as the coach spread throughout Europe and eventually throughout the world, the word coaching, about being a vehicle of transport, became a metaphor for us as coaches, helping our clients get from point A to point B better and more effectively than they would on their own. So if you've ever flown coach or been in a stagecoach, or if you think about why the word coach as it relates to coaching, that's the background, that's the origin story. And visual coaching, because so few people are really using visuals intentionally, it is a frontier. And my presentation was called Visual Coaching, A New Frontier, which is a metaphor. How could you go forward using visuals and imagery and metaphor in your coaching and training and leadership practices? So if you look at this image, leadership, it's a compass, right? It helps to point us in a direction. That's a metaphor. If we talk about hitting our targets, that's a metaphor. What are the keys to success? How do we get out of the box? For HR people, I talk about this with my HR students, how do we get out of the HR box and think outside the HR box? In the training world, we talk about teaching people to fish rather than giving them a fish. It has nothing to do with fishing and everything to do with learning. In career coaching, we talk about career paths. So to me, my career has been more of a roller coaster with ups and downs, twists and turns, exhilarating highs and terrifying plummets. But a career path implies that it's some laid out stroll in the park. But on our career path, we come to what? A fork in the road, where we need to make a decision. Again, humorous, cheesy, corny dad joke, but you won't forget it the next time you come to a fork in the road and need to make a choice and need to choose a direction. One of the key words right now is burnout, right? If you think about the word burnout as a flickering flame that is so close to going out, that's how we feel sometimes when we're really burnt out. So how do we reignite that flame? How do we regrow that candle? So that is a metaphor. We very often don't think about what the metaphor of burnout actually means and where it comes from. We talk about crossing a bridge when we come to it. In New York, we may cross the Brooklyn Bridge. I did a similar workshop with a group in San Francisco. I used the Golden Gate Bridge. And when I did this workshop or a similar one with a group in London, I used the Tower Bridge. We need to use metaphors and analogies and stories and examples that resonate with our stakeholder. We need to meet people where they live, not where we live. So we need to modify our metaphors, our stories, and our language if we want to resonate with people. So for example, when I was in college, I had a textbook called Bridges Not Walls. And like the bricks that make up this bridge, bricks can be used like words to build a bridge between people and connect them, or build a wall between people and divide them. So the same bricks or the same words can be used to either connect or to divide. Those are metaphors. So I use a lot of baseball analogies and metaphors because I'm a big baseball fan, go Yankees and Mets. But however, not everyone is a Yankee or Met fan or a baseball fan, right? So there are times that we need to, again, if I'm talking to someone from Europe, I may use a soccer analogy. With someone from India, I may use cricket as an analogy, or Canada, hockey, or New Zealand or Australia, rugby. And if you notice with the visual imagery, the cultural and gender diversity, it's so easy for me to just put up Yankees players, right? But that wouldn't connect with people or resonate with people. A lot of my students are international students, many from China. A baseball analogy or metaphor is not going to resonate with a 25-year-old female from China the way something else might be. It could be theater, it could be dance. But if we know what interests people, where their passions lie, we can use metaphors and analogies that resonate with them. Nature is a universal analogy. We've all seen the tree. Michelle earlier in the chat box talked about planting the seed of change, right? That's a metaphor we often use. So in leadership, we can talk about planting the seed of a new idea, getting to the root of a problem, going out on a limb, branching out in new directions, seeing which ideas bear fruit, and knowing that the sky is the limit if we're successful, right? These are all metaphors that we use as common language, but now with more awareness, and we could use our metaphors and choose our metaphors more strategically and more powerfully. Trivia question for 25 points. What famous movie is this quote from? You have 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, no one got it? It is from one of the great movies of all time, Flashdance. So when you're talking about dreams, if our eyes are open to it, our minds are open to it, if we're looking for it, we'll notice how often people talk about dreams and hopes and aspirations. And our job, again, as leaders, is to help people's dreams not die and not be deferred, but to come true. So I could go on forever. I have a million more where these came from. This was just the what? The tip of the iceberg, right? So if it's up to us, if you want to be a master of metaphor, like Aristotle talked about, we need to dive beneath the surface. We need to explore the world of possibilities within our own worlds, but in the world of others. Last concept before we put you in one more 5-minute breakout session is I asked the question, and let's see in the chat box, what might the rainbow colored eye represent on the cover of my book? Originally, it was a blue eye because my company is Big Blue Gumball and I don't have blue eyes, but it was brand consistency. But then I realized, why do you think I switched from a blue eye to the rainbow eye? Any thoughts? Diversity, Lyndon, you got it. So the rainbow eye, no one in the world has this color eye. No one I've ever met, unless it's a contact lens, right? Just as no one in the world has a rainbow eye, it's a visual reminder that no one in the world sees the world through the same lens that you do, right? So in the spirit of diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging, we need to use all the colors of the rainbow, all the colors in the crayon box to help to paint a picture of a better future, right? As opposed to a black and white world and living in the past. We need to look at the world. We can look at the world through a microscope at the details, a telescope looking out into the future, or a kaleidoscope, and really get innovative and see all the colors and the whole spectrum. The rainbow eye, I have a concept called flipping the rainbow eye, which is about looking inward, reflecting on our own perceptions and perspectives and the lens through which we see the world, realizing that as leaders, not everyone sees the world through the same lens that we do. And we need to see the world through the lens of others. We need to help, and as the phrase of this conference goes, we need to see the world together. We need to dream together. And if we dream together and if we work together, we can turn those dreams into realities. So with that, I want to, one final quote, Charlie put this in the quote, his father mentioned this, I believe, Disney's quote, that if you can dream it, you can do it. So it's not just about dreaming, it's not just about thinking, it's about doing. How do we turn ideas into actions to produce results, right? So it's great to have time for thinking and dreaming and reflecting, but ultimately, if we want to change the world, we actually have to make those dreams come true. So my question for you now is, when you think about leadership, dreams, and metaphors, I want to ask you for your insights and actions. What was one key takeaway from this session, from my session, and how will you apply it in your work and or in your life going forward? So if you would, put it in the chat box right now, just think about it, and then we're going to put you back in a breakout room just for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back, wrap up my session, and take another quick break. So if you would, right now, just 60 seconds, answer this question in the chat box. I see Michelle's The Power of Metaphor. Anyone else? Any thoughts, reflections, insights, ahas, or what are you going to do differently going forward? And we'll save all the chat comments because they're going so fast. I haven't had a chance to read them all, but I look forward to reading them all later. So this is terrific feedback for me to know what your thoughts are and what resonated with you. So take another 30 seconds to put your thoughts in the chat, and then Jada, if you'll set up the next breakout, 5 minutes in groups of 2 or 3. So last couple of things before we wrap up. So one, Q&A. So you had great conversations, insights, and actions. I look forward to reading the chat box. In the time that we have left, just want to open up. What questions do you have? Let's just take a couple of minutes. Time for maybe like 2 or 3 questions. So what are you thinking? What questions do you have? Anyone? Just turn on your mic and jump right in.
How do we get people to feel more comfortable with metaphors and visual?
How do we get people? Are you talking about the speaker or people listening to them?
People listening to them.
I think if we use metaphors, because metaphors can either help us connect or they can help confuse, right? So I think if we choose our metaphors strategically and intentionally and use a metaphor that simplifies things instead of making them more complicated, I think people are used to metaphors. We use them so often we don't even realize it. We don't even realize how often we hear metaphors unless we're really attuned to it. And hopefully after today, you'll start to notice them hiding in plain sight all the time. But I think most people are receptive to metaphors if they are relevant to them. So that's what I'd say is choose our metaphors more carefully and more strategically, and use metaphors that will resonate with your audience or your listener or your reader. So that's what I would say to that.
Thank you.
Sure. Another question.
Hey, Todd, it's Lynette.
So
I love that framework you have, like sort of the 4 buckets of visual sort of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a successful way you've used that to help guide, let's say, coaching client in understanding the ways that can show up?
Yeah, I mean, basically when I do my trainings and as I did in the Harvard workshop, again, the video is available for anyone to watch it, is I basically help people think about, I basically break them down and say, all right, here's examples of using visual imagery and visual language and drawing. So just for one quick example, I wrote an article for Inc. magazine called, Can You Draw What Your Company Does? So imagine if you did that exercise with your client as I do and say, all right, if you had to draw a picture of what you do, how you do it, and how you're different from and better than the competition, it could be a process diagram or it could be a metaphor, it could be an analogy. And the one I write about in that article, one of my clients said, he drew a picture of a big whale eating up all these goldfish and said, we're eating up the competition. And then his boss said, that's not accurate at all because we're not a whale and they're goldfish, some of our competitors are bigger than us. He said it's more like, and he thought for a few seconds, he said it's more like they're sharks because they just bite off the business and bleed their customers dry and swim off. We are more like dolphin. We are warm and friendly and smart and intelligent, and we communicate. So going from whale versus goldfish to dolphin versus shark, the dolphin became their metaphor and their mascot. So that's just one example of how by drawing and illustrating an abstract idea, like what do you explain to us what you do, led to this aha of this is who we are, this is how we're going to behave, this is how we're going to treat our customers. So that's just one of many examples. He used visual imagery, visual language, and storytelling plus drawing to reach this outcome. So that's just one quick example that I often use to illustrate.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. How does a leader use visuals and metaphors to concretize their own dream before they can communicate it to others? Because I think we need, first of all, to have a concrete image of that dream ourselves before we can communicate it to others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We need to be clear on, we could dream together and we could brainstorm dreams with other people, but as a leader, if you're not clear on your vision, how are other people supposed to be clear on it? So often, I always say that people are not mind readers. So unless you create a really clear picture of what you want that vision or outcome to look like, what you want the future to be and look and feel like, how are you going to make that dream a reality? So that's a great point that leaders, there's two components of visual leadership. There's the visual thinking, and then there's the visual communication. And I always use the quote from Bernard Baruch, the financier, that the ability to express an idea is as important as the idea itself, right? So we need to express it clearly and vividly, but we first need to be clear on what our own vision is. And that's one of the biggest challenges in leadership, leaders who are not clear in their own vision and or unable to communicate that vision to inspire and motivate others. So one of the things I always talk about is people are there's facts and figures and there's feelings. People are motivated and inspired by emotion and feelings. No Excel spreadsheet ever motivated someone to get up in the morning and change the world, right? It's the dream, it's the vision, it's the hope, it's the picture of a better future. Martin Luther King did not say, I have a business plan, I have an Excel spreadsheet, I have a Word document, I have a PowerPoint presentation, right? He said, I have a dream. It's that simple and that timeless. So again, those technologies didn't exist back then, but you get the analogy. It's all about motivating people through a picture of a better future. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up my session. Just for time, I could go on this forever, but last couple of thoughts. One is this quote by Anatole France, the French poet: to accomplish great things, we must not only act, but also dream. Not only plan, but also believe. I love that quote. And for more on visual thinking and use of metaphor, one, please check out my book if you have a chance, and specifically part 3 is all about visual metaphors. Go to my website, toddcherches.com. You can see my TED Talk right there on the homepage. I just wrote my first article for Chief Learning Officer magazine on how and why leaders can and should leverage the power of visual thinking. When you get the slides, if you click on this slide, it'll take you right to the article. And I put together this Spotify playlist of songs with dream in the title, dream, imagination, or related themes. So if you just go to Spotify at any time, you could listen to these songs. So I just want to leave you with these final words that when it comes to your leadership dreams, if you can see the invisible, you can do the impossible. So with that, thank you for your time and attention. And as we go from day to a dreamy state of night, I encourage you to dream big. Thank you very much.